Correct, yeah, we can call the meeting to order. I see Heather isn't in yet, but I'm assuming she'll jump in ASAP. Oh, coming in now. Actually, I believe there's a requirement to have the live transcript function enabled, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. There'll be a distracting transcript at the bottom. Many of the time incorrect, but as far as I understand, that has to be on.
Okay, so let's come to order here. We ready to go, Aaron?
Yep,
and
10:02.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us here. I will attempt to do justice to my few years of training under Dr. Cord, and hopefully, lead us in an expeditious and good meeting here. Is there anybody from the public that's here that wants to speak their piece for their time?
Not that I can see currently, no.
All right. So I know we have a couple of letters, and I think at least one is here on 8B, but is there another one on the convention center? Has that been?
That is not, that was received after the agenda had posted, so the item is not on the agenda currently.
Can we modify the agenda so that we can add that?
Not our current agenda. We could modify the work plan to include it in our next meeting for discussion, which I've kind of tentatively done on my own side.
Okay, let's please do that then.
Yep. And we can kind of chat about that in item 5A on the annual work plan.
Great. So can I get a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting in June?
Motion.
Thank you. We got a second.
Second.
Thank you. Any comments, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
All right, so moved here. And I'm not sure I need to do that on a consent agenda item, so I apologize, but Aaron, who's bringing us through the?
Sure, I can run us through. So item 5A is the work plan. I can pull it up and share screen here. Confirm you can see the work plan here. So my intention, if the request to discuss the convention center participating in the 90-minute free program, we would include it under the parking programs and rates item of November 3rd. And I've made a note on my own documents to then call that out specifically in November. Other than that, there's no changes from our last meeting where we had the conceptual work plan. I think we updated that with the ongoing review and potential revision of the meter district, so that you'll see that occur at each of the meetings throughout the year. Other than that, it's the standard kind of flow of reviewing the financials, mid-year, so on. So unless there's any other comments, this is pretty unchanged from the last one, with the exception of my internal notes to include the November item.
So from a.
Oh, sorry, Charlie,
Go ahead,
can I just ask real quick? If there are 1, 2, or 3 items that you thought we should highlight as being particularly important and extraordinary or different from the normal, are there any there that would qualify under that over the whole year?
I think the only extraordinary item we have is the ongoing, review throughout the year of the meter district reserve. Other than that, I'm not seeing anything out of the ordinary. Now, of course, throughout the year, there's always opportunities to add things to this as the year goes on. It just so happened that the request last week came after the fact that we had already posted all of the items.
And just to clarify, that means that's November 3 update on parking programs and rates. That's where that goes?
Correct.
Thank you. Done.
Yep.
So Aaron, as a chair privilege here, maybe. So a couple of events that have happened here recently that I'm confused on the parking around these events. So I go to a Shark game and I see the meters get changed, and so there's a special event rate parking when you go to a Sharks game, right?
Yep.
For that period of time. So that makes complete sense to me. I get that. You shouldn't be paying your $1 an hour or whatever it is, during a Sharks game. So completely on board. Outside of the Giants Stadium, Excite Stadium, there is parking along that road that, and again, this is a very self-serving comment because I run the garage out there. But there is stuff that's cars, trucks, vehicles that are parked out there for extended periods of time. And clearly fans are parking out on that road as well. And it just makes for, I'll say unpaid, I'll say that first, but unsafe conditions in that area. And then we just had a football game on the other night, and the same thing is happening where you have to have organic parking for Shark games for, any event, but immediately adjacent areas, and this is Humboldt Street and, some areas that are adjacent to the South Campus. People are parking illegally, parking so that it's a problem for residents. And so I'm all for residents having a permit and being able to park during my events or San Jose Giants events and stuff like that, right? That they should have first opportunity to be in their homes and not being impacted more than they're already impacted by these events. But we don't, if they want to sell their lawn, they have the right, I think, to sell their lawn for their parking. But the street, we have to figure out how to do a better job of that with metering or something. So I at some point, if you could figure out how we could address that, and that's not for today's agenda because it's not on the agenda, but if you could figure out how to put that out there, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, Charlie, this is John Risto, Director of Transportation. There might be, I do think we probably need to take a look at that whole area. Things have changed now that, the construction is underway and the parking garage is up, and but it's probably a different group of mine instead of the parking folks that have to rethink the street segment there. And I think we're due to do that. That section of Alma around 10th is probably definitely in need of something like that. Right now, and I'm sure Heather would tell you this, we're not actually enforcing those timed parking locations right now. We are just about ready to get going on that again, but yeah, that's one of the reasons that there may be some general violating of some of that. That was one of the service areas that we haven't got back going, but it's within probably a month, Heather, maybe something like that we would do.
Yeah, a month or two.
Yeah, two different things. I think we need to talk about offline with set another section of my department about what to do about Alma and some of those other roadways. But the parking piece, Heather will be putting back into enforcement in about 2 months. So does that help?
Yeah, that's wonderful. And the cleaning up is probably the number one thing I see on my police log for the university police log is the amount of stolen cars that get dumped on Humboldt Street. And it's and if we had some better restrictions or we had some notices of who can be in these different areas, and I'm not trying to restrict, I'm just trying to have an understanding of who's supposed to be here and who's not supposed to be here. Maybe we stop this dumping of vehicles because you're bringing in an element that neighborhood is already a tough, challenged neighborhood. They don't need any more challenges. Okay. 5B.
Actually, this is an approval item. So if I can get a motion in a second on the work plan.
Motion.
I second it.
Thank you, Wolfram. Any other discussion, guys?
Can I get all in favor, raise their hands? Passing that 1, 2, 3, 4.
Aye.
All right, you're unanimous. Thank you.
Item 5B is, and I can share a screen again here, is the annual memo to the City Council's Transportation and Environment Committee It's a requirement for all the boards and commissions to go to their representative committee with their annual report of what they did over the year and what they plan to do in the upcoming year. So it's a standard kind of boilerplate memo. And then attached to that are a couple of the highlights of the work that was completed during the year, pretty generic, kind of the budgets and all of that. And then, of course, kind of taking our work plan, which we just approved, and putting it into a little different format to show what we'll be doing throughout the year, the ongoing review of the financials. I did put in here that we will continue the review and potential revision of the existing meter district area reserve, and that would be ongoing throughout the year. So this is the standard annual report. This is an approval item. If there are any questions, happy to answer them.
So along the line of the question that was asked earlier, nothing out of the ordinary from previous years.
No.
Just what David's question before, right?
Nope.
Can I get a motion?
Motion.
Thank
Second
you.
it.
Thank you. I have the usual suspects here for that. I appreciate that. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're unanimous. Thank you.
All
6A.
right. 6A. Let me go ahead and just pull up the appropriate document here on mine, and I'll share screen again. Blow it up a little bit here. This is a look at our 2021 capital improvement program, kind of a snapshot of what we had achieved from a spending perspective, with a couple of notes on details in specific line items. We had 16.9 million budgeted in the CIP for 2021. During the year in the spring, we rebudgeted about 4.5 million. Rebudgeting basically means we moved that money to the next year, knowing that we weren't going to undertake those projects and we wanted to earmark that money for the next year. Garage facade improvements, 4.3 million. That is the Market Street garage facade, basically removing all of that tile we've talked about in the past, and then coming back with a new facade. Didn't make much headway in that last year. We're working with Public Works. They brought in some consultants to really kick that project off. They just signed that agreement, so we'll start seeing that project move forward better in this year. Greater downtown parking inventory. This is really monies tied to the Deerdon area on land acquisition and parking lot or garage development at the Lot E and Milligan sites. We knew we weren't going to expend all of the 500,000, so we moved 100,000 to next year. And the public art project as well. That is monies that we will apply to the facade at the Market Street garage. We move that to next year as well. Other than that, we spent 12 million. And when I say spent, it's either spent or encumbered monies. So I can quickly run through this. The downtown event parking dynamic message signs. These are the message signs leading to the arena off of the freeway exits. That project is complete now. I'm hoping this line drops off of our budget going forward, so we don't have to deal with it. It's not a project per se that.
So Arian, I think a minor correction. So you didn't spend 12 million.
Yes, correct. We did not write 12. 24. No, this would be 12 million is either spent, meaning we cut checks for it, or we encumbered or allocated the funds specifically to a project. Like we have a contract. A good example of that would be the revenue control, our parks project, all of the equipment in the garages. We have a contract for 5.3 million. We've really only spent 1 million of that, but we have the contract and the funds in a separate encumbered account for that project. So we account for that money being spent.
Well, wouldn't that be the last column there?
That's this column.
That's what you spent or encumbered.
Correct. Yes, this is the total budget amount. So we So the way to look at it would be, we started the year with 6.5. We didn't make any changes to this particular line item in the re-budget process. So we still had 6.5 and we've spent just under the 6.5 or encumbered.
Right, so you spent or encumbered 8.3 million of the $12.4 million budget.
Correct.
Okay.
And then as we hit the end of the year, then we'll start looking at line items again and saying, okay, not only did we not spend all of that money, what do we want to do with that money? Are we going to just let it come down to the ending fund balance, or do we still need those funds? We didn't make the proactive approach in the spring to move the money to the next year. Do we want to have that money next year or just let it drop? And we're just going through that process now. Like a good example of that would be at the minor facility improvement level. We had 1.7 million. We only spent roughly 500,000 in project level expenses or encumbrances. So we have 1.2 million. What do we want to do with that? Do we foresee enough projects in the upcoming year that we need to add funding into that year, or do we let it drop? And so we're just kind of evaluating that now as we move forward. Any questions specifically on any of the line items? Of course, we're going to be coming back next year with, or next meeting with our year end, full financials of the operating and the capital side. I envision that the capital side will look much like this. This was a kind of preview to that.
Arian, could I ask real quick? What is the surveillance camera system?
Surveillance camera system.
800,000 that I think, does that mean that was spent or not spent?
No, so we did not spend anything. We
Right.
had $800,000 in our security improvements. We envision that money being applied to upgrading our 10-plus-year-old surveillance cameras and servers at each of our garages. They're in need of repair. The city is actually going through an evaluation for a citywide contract for those cameras, not just our division. There was too many independent contracts out there in different divisions, libraries, community centers, garages, airport, police department, like all these different entities that use cameras, city hall, that they want to bring it under one umbrella. And so they're going through that evaluation. We didn't get to spend any money this year. We're probably going to move that money to next year.
Who's leading that effort in the city? What department, do you know?
Purchasing takes the lead in kind of wrangling all the independent departments. We then feed them what our scope and desires are, and they'll put it in together into an RFP package to bid it out.
Do you know when the RFP might go out?
I do not yet.
No idea. Thank you.
Yep. There's no other questions. This was just an update item. There's no action on this. We could move to 6B.
Right?
Okay. 6B is the, I'm going to pull up my own notes here. I think the easiest way for me or for you to kind of follow along potentially is for me to go through the narrative piece in highlight form, but have this up for you, actually the financials. Does that work for everybody? I can make it a little bigger for those that are trying to follow along on the screen here. Please stop me if anybody's got any questions. So what we're looking at is the city's proposed budget. This was released in May. Final approval was at the end of June, so after our last meeting. The final budget is anticipated for the kind of mid-end of this month, September, for final adoption. From a revenue perspective, we are anticipating $7.9 million in revenue. It's about a 25% increase over last year's estimate. It's our best guess of what our revenues will look like with the impacts of COVID continuing to linger. Office return to work still a little bit in limbo and continually getting pushed back. We'll continue to monitor that, make adjustments throughout the year as the opportunities arise in the mid-year and different budget cycle periods. If you remember, like our kind of bellwether years were 14 to 18 million in revenue. So pretty significant drop, as you recall. Transfers from the capital fund. So this is a transfer from the capital fund into the operating fund. Last year, we anticipated a $5.7 million infusion. This year, we're looking at 4.9 to bring that in to basically balance the budget. Operating expenditures, 11.8 million. It's $1 million increase over last year, primarily as a result of increasing our contractual budgets upwards, and in some cases to their kind of contractual maximums, just to provide us the flexibility. The biggest one there would be our parking operator. We would anticipate that that number will come in under budget, but it affords us the opportunity to start bringing back staff from our operator as our operations needs increases, as the convention center comes back online. We've already had them start recalling some special event staff, some office staff to facilitate kind of the ramp up in business. DOT personnel, that's the city staff costs, are up by 350,000 over last year. Overhead, which is an allocation to all of the city's funds that cover everything from attorney's fees, allocated kind of lease, if you will, space in the city hall, went down from 2 million to 1.5 million. And then we increased this year our police garage security detail. This is SJPD overtime roles to patrol the downtown and our garages specifically, primarily in the evening weekends, Friday, Saturday nights. We effectively had no kind of evening bar crowd or activity in the evenings last year, so we've slashed that budget. We're bringing it back on again this year with the hopes that PD has the resources and the interest in taking on these overtime positions.
So why is the public restroom zero?
It's being funded out of another fund, not out of the parking fund this year.
Yay.
Yeah. We'll see if we can continue
Arian,
that.
how many cops do we get for $150,000? How is that allocated out, like hours or?
It's usually
3 cops for 2 hours? Only joking.
no. Specifically, it's usually two-man cars on Friday and Saturday evenings for 6+ hours. I'd like to say, if there's, we've had times where there was Christmas in the park, a Sharks game, a convention, other concerts, multiple things going on downtown, and we'd say, hey, are there opportunities to increase this? One area we've actually spent money on out of this line item, in addition to the security detail, is providing kind of downtown assistance during some of those peak events like Christmas in the Park, just to facilitate the movement of people around that Market San Carlos corridor there, because it was so dangerous with cars, the light rail, all the kids running across the street to get to Christmas in the Park. So we've kind of used some of that money there. But historically, it's the multi-man cars doing nighttime patrols.
So it's 2 cars with 2 officers in them Friday and Saturday nights from Dark 9 or 10 to 2 or something like that, or?
Yep, roughly.
Okay,
Yep.
close enough.
Yep, and it's the billable hours. I don't know, I could go back and look, but we usually get a sergeant and several officers, depends on their regular pay rate. This is overtime.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So Aaron, how do we justify, limited revenues, right? And I get why we have limited revenue. So
Yep.
I'm not looking to justify that part, right?
Yep.
But so we just have this really small increase year over year, but we're having this 25% increase in DOT.
In this right here,
The going from 6 million to 7.5 million.
this is our contractual. So we brought this number down. So this number was down significantly due to the pandemic's impacts on our contracts. Not spending money with some contracts due to, we didn't need them, sweeping, power washing, we weren't doing those types of things. Our vendor had slashed staff to basically a handful of managers that would keep the lights on for us. So we saw the need to basically bring those contracts back up to their, I wouldn't say total historical norm, if you will, but bring those in line with the anticipation. I mean, when we were creating this budget throughout, February, March, and April, that things were looking good, especially towards the tail end of that period of time, that vaccinations were getting rolled out, talk of coming back into the office in the summer. So yeah, we bumped these numbers up to anticipate bringing in, again, out of this 7 million budget, 3+ million of that is our operator. So the big bulk of that is our operator and being able to facilitate having the funds there when we need to bring back large quantities of staff at these garages.
So you're almost better off having the garages be free.
From a sheer revenue to expense perspective,
And perception and all that, yeah.
I wouldn't go that far.
I know, I said almost, I'm a business person too, but
Yeah.
you're bringing back all the expense.
I'm bringing back the budgeted flexibility to do it. We haven't brought back most of the staff that this budget would allow us to do. But we had to have the funds available in the event we needed to. I think you'll find it mid-year, we're going to be well under the $7.5 million in our contractual expenditures. And we can adjust that number downward at that point from a budget perspective. I think conservatively budgeting both revenues and expenses, admittedly saying, here's where we think we'll be from a revenue perspective. We're probably going to beat it. Here's where we think we're going to be from an expense side of things. We're cautiously optimistic that we're going to come well under that as well.
I just struggle with putting a budget together, the optics on this, right? Of showing a paltry increase in your revenues, but showing, a massive increase in the expenses. The optics of that, aren't good. And I understand what you're saying, this gives us flexibility. But why wouldn't you budget the flexibility on the revenue side then, if you're putting the capacity in place for the expenses? You're hedging your bet on the revenue, but you're not hedging your bet on the expenses.
Well, I think to a certain degree we are, with the revenues being up 25%. A big chunk of that is hopefully monthly parkers coming back in earnest, and just daily activity around businesses and restaurants. We'll see if that happens. I mean, at this point, this is what we've presented. I think as we go throughout the year, we'll be making adjustments just like we did last year. Unfortunately, every one of our adjustments last year from a revenue perspective was downward. I'm hopeful that this year we're making revenue adjustments in a bit of an upward trend as we continue to navigate the year. Heather, Elias, anybody else got any comments on that?
No, it just, we definitely have been taking a very conservative approach to the fact that there's just so many unknowns during the pandemic. And wanted to make sure that we were on both sides of the coin, being conservative enough so we don't find ourselves in a difficult situation.
I guess just to make a comment for whatever it's worth, it sounds like the plug number is the 4.9 million. And if your revenues are higher and your expenditures are less, then the 4.9 million goes down. And if it's the other way around, it's going to go up in order to balance the books.
I'm optimistic that we're going to generate more revenue. We're going to wring out our expenses and tightly monitor those so that we can drive that number down that we have to transfer out. From a transfer side of the house, no significant changes there. I would point out that we do have a mayor's budget message, I believe it was, request or push to put in 100,000 in the downtown ice rink improvements. As far as I understand, that was approved, so we will see that in the final adopted budget. So this number will go up by 100,000. Other than that, the ending fund balance with the basic reserves that we have to have with the unrestricted amount of $400,000. This is kind of the pared down version of that, of the revenue, operating expenses with the net revenue, and that's where that 4.9 kind of balancing act number comes from to offset that. Again, hope to drive that number down. And then, as you'll remember from our last meeting, the 5-year CIP for the upcoming year 21-22 is here. So we've got 2.9 million earmarked. As we go through this year, as we said, we moved some monies over to this year. Security improvements, for example, we had 800,000 last year. We didn't spend it. We know we'll need it in this upcoming year, hopefully, if we go through the process. So then we'll have 875,000 in that line item. And so these, for the most part, will unchanged from the 2.9, except for the infusion of monies carried over from last year.
I have a question here.
Sure.
So how come that we have for all the years the exact same numbers?
It's effectively a shot in the dark as to what the out years will need from a capital perspective.
But wouldn't you at least factor in something like an inflation rate?
Since we do this every year and we're effectively tying up the money in that 1 year, unless there's big foreseen acknowledged projects in the out years, we have historically, in my nearly 10 years, unless there's something that we said, you know what, in year 3 of a 5-year thing, we know we need $5 million for X. We've created our year 1 and kind of just carried that across the years, because these are the baseline amounts going forward.
So said slightly differently, because I think Wolfram, is on the right track here, is that.
Oh yeah, we acknowledge that this is not a perfect
Yeah, and I can be had with the 3%, inflationary increase, because, at some point that's noise and you're guessing at this stuff at this point. But you should have a deferred maintenance schedule that is published, that the city subscribes to. And in 23, 24, you need to put a new roof on, the garage, or you need to resurface the garage. And it might be more interesting to have those lumpy items there, because then you could talk to that.
Yep.
Rather than just have everything as peanut butter and smooth, because I think you have those same projects, but the way you've portrayed it here, you don't get to see what those projects are or call them out uniquely.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the biggest line item that we undertake, unless it's a special project, like I'm thinking of things over the years, like a large investment in elevators, or at a certain point in time, we replaced several staircases in the garages, full metal pans, concrete, big time projects. Those would have their own line item. Other than that, there are bigger numbers that will fall into our minor facility improvements. We might have to, repave a lot. Well, it might be 50 grand to do it, but we're not going to have a repave lot line item. That to us is a minor project. So
Completely agree. That's
what you're saying right now, we don't have, and we do have that item. A lot of our things have been done, and they're 10 to 15 to 20 year kind of repetitive cycles. And so in our 5 year that we have right here, we don't have one of those big things.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm shocked by that. Absolutely shocked. With the state of some of the garages that I've been through, I'm just very, very surprised.
Well, we recently did all LED lighting in all of the garages. So that was, a bigger project. The elevators is certainly on there from a rehab, not a replacement, not a, complete overhaul. And that line item is there. As you recall, we were going to carry some monies over. So yeah, we do not have currently, and admittedly, given the state of the parking fund, we did not proactively go out and say, well, what are some other large ticket pet projects that we could undertake?
All right, so I'll try one more bite at the apple here.
Sure.
Because I think it's going where David was going, where Wolfram was going here. Do we have, the assessment of our various garages when their useful life is up? Or
I
when?
wouldn't say we have a, targeted date of end of useful life. We just did, I want to say when I say a year or two ago, that really means 2 or 3 years ago, because we lost a year and a half now. So let's say 2 to 3 years ago, we had a complete facility assessment done by a consultant where they walked every garage, took core samples out of the concrete, and basically generated a list of, and we've talked about this before, A, B, and C priority items. A are you have to take care of these right now. B are you should take care of these in the near term. And the C items being those would be nice to have, get to them when you can, or, ignore them. And we addressed all of the A items already. We have undertaken many of the B items and have those kind of in our minor facility improvement budget. And the C will continue to evaluate. So no, we don't have the Market Street garage will only live to see, 2052. But we do have an assessment that says, here's what you need to address to maintain the facility.
Charlie, Henry, can you hear me?
Absolutely, Henry.
Yeah, most of these are construction related events. They're contracts out to other parties. Typically, the city public works, I've seen it all the time, put a contingency in every contract. So my thought is to add a line item contingency for the out years. or for all 5 years.
Well, so that is a way, Henry. So I agree. You know, the way that to me, there's 2 or 3 ways to present this thing, and I don't know if there's a right way. There's this peanut butter approach that's in front of us that has the same number every single year, right? And so and if the expenditures are typical and they're minor, I think that's not a horrible way or not a bad way of going about things. You could do a detailed version of this that are going to honestly change these numbers a little bit, or you put a escalator on here and it changes the deck chairs around, but it's not changing the number. Or the way I was looking at it, I was looking at this lumpiness, that there are certain years where the consultant's report's going to say you got to spend $3 million on stuff, and other years you're not going to have to spend any. I rather have lumpiness personally, but in the scheme of all these numbers, they're not that large. And if what Arian's saying is correct, and I trust him, that we don't have a large ticket item in these next 5 years, then we're reasonably okay with this approach. But the caveat is there a large expenditure in year 6, right? Is there something that's just outside of our window that we should be at least aware of, so that these reserve-like numbers that are on these charts, do they pick that up? Because Aaron will say we're not going to spend this stuff in certain years, and it rolls over to the next year, therefore we have year 6 covered. I'm just worried about that new roof, or the new walls, or that you got to rip something down and rebuild. I'm worried about the big item, not the small stuff.
I think, Charlie, to your point about lumpiness, our previous CIPs pre-COVID all had lumpiness in the first couple of years. The first 3 years were pretty good at knowing and programming what is coming down the pipe at us. And the year 4 and 5 traditionally have been kind of almost plug numbers. We know we're going to spend money. We know we need to put it aside. We need to put it in the budget. Here's where we do it. We focus mostly on that 1 to 3 year range for those bigger projects. To answer your kind of 6 year, 7 year, what's kind of peeking behind that on the back flip side of the page, that is where we have had the reserves, right? We had the money in the capital reserves to address those things should they have come up more immediately than we anticipated, or if they were kind of tucked away in year 6 and 7. With the pandemic, we really scrubbed our capital. And so I think that's really kind of one of the other reasons it's kind of pretty flat across the board. We had originally an elevator plan for adding a second elevator at Second San Carlos Garage. That was a couple $1 million. We scrubbed that project off of the books, specifically because the second we start dipping into those reserves to cover our operating costs, back to your earlier comments about revenues, we get nervous. And so this CIP was purposefully put forward as kind of very bare bones, knowing we didn't have the reserves to tap into if we needed them, and that revenue would be an issue kind of moving forward. I fully expect, and I hope, lumpiness will return in the near future, because that means then our revenues are better, our activity down in the downtown is increased to kind of drive that. So I hear what you're saying. I think it's probably mostly a product of the COVID environment and us kind of really trimming the fat or trimming anything where we could in this particular CIP.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Heather. So, I think I understand it that way as well, and that's good. The chart that scares me in this whole process is the attachment to the proposed capital budget, right? And it has, this peanut butter approach that we're talking about, over the $2.9 million a year for capital, right? And every single year being exactly the same. And then it shows what our reserve levels are, and it shows the ending fund balance of reserves essentially at $1 million right, in 25, 26. So it's a going out of business story, right? And so that's where in year 6 or year 7, if there is a, oh shit, or large expenditure, or, you know, a rainy day or something, we have absolutely, we're completely unprepared for. That's the reason I'm saying it today, 5 years in advance or 6 or 7 years in advance, is that this is not, and this is not a criticism of the people here, right? You know, there's a whole bunch of economics that are going on, but this is a going out of business story. This is not a healthy fund. And we have aging properties, right? And everybody has aging properties, you know, and so if those aging properties come due, I'm not sure, you know, we're going back to the city council saying, I need $10 million, or I need frankly $50 million, you know, or 60 or 80 at that point to repair this garage or build a new garage, or, and then we have an inventory problem, you know, during that 2-year construction period. So,
Yes.
Sorry, I'm on the horse here, guys, but to me, that's how I'm looking at this, and I get scared when you turn the page. Because everything on here is okay. It's just you turn the page, it could be scary.
And I think you bring up a very good point here. You know, this is really the scary part. And I also understand it's difficult to project the future, but there are expenses what we know will come sooner or later. Like one of the examples was mentioned, if a garage needs a new roof, this is something which is foreseeable.
Well, the good news is we don't have traditional roofs. We have,
Yeah,
parking
sorry,
decks.
everybody could get
So-
that. That's where I use the roof. So.
You know, I think not to pat ourselves on the back from a staff side, but, you know, we do walk these facilities daily, to use a generic term, and routinely address those little needling things that kind of blossom into bigger things over time. And as we've done that for the last 10 years I've been here and 30 years before me, you know, our facilities by and large are in good shape. You know, we didn't have a ton in those consultant reports, you know, and luckily we aren't dealing with snow and ice like in other parts of the country that really deteriorate concrete. You know, we're pretty fortunate to live in an area where you build a big concrete rectangle, and as long as it's used for what it's used for, to park cars, it'll last for 100 years. As long as you maintain it, you regularly address the leaking oil, the little nicks and cracks. So could there be a big expense in year 6 or 7 that we're not currently identifying? Of course, there's always something, but I think that as long as we maintain the facilities in the manner we're currently doing, addressing those things that pop up in these various consultant reports as we do those every, you know, 5+ years, I think we'll be in good shape.
All right, let me put a bow on this, I hope. Okay.
Yes.
For the next meeting, how about you come back to us and you tell us when is the big expenditure, right? You know, when is, you know, the Market Street garage needs to come down, or when is that next big hit? And it might be
The good
15
news
years
is
from
at our next meeting is our first opportunity to talk about the 5-year. It's like the super early chance for the parking board to kind of review and opine on what that 5-year CIP looks like. Admittedly, we're going to look 1 year further than we're looking today, only, you know, 2 months from now. Don't know what we'll think of that year 6 look, but I'll look through our reports. I'll look and see if I can identify any big bad monsters out there, and then we can talk about how the 5-year CIP looks at that point.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, we're on 6C.
6C. Heather, this is the overview of existing. Do you want to share screen? How do you want to do this? You're on mute, by the way.
Can you pull it up?
I can.
I don't have the PDF version up. And can I ask a question? Because I am not seeing the closed caption across my screen. I saw that. Okay, is anybody else seeing it?
You
Is
gotta
it just
turn it
me?
on. You
Gotta turn it on.
I
you
have
gotta-
to turn it on myself.
Yeah. So
Okay.
Charlie opened it up for all of us to be able to do that, and then we could each do it.
All right, thank you. I just
Go
wanted
ahead
to
and
make
leave
sure
it
that-
off because it's super distracting.
All right, thank you. Okay,
All right, here you go.
all right.
You see the memo?
I do see the memo. Okay. All right. So as Arian touched on when we went over the work plan for this year, we have planned for a discussion and kind of the progression of this topic for each of our meetings this year. So we've programmed quite a bit of time to be able to talk through this topic of meter district area reserves. And our first meeting on the subject, we wanted to kind of just give you a background on the existing meter reserves and how they came about, what the intent was around them, and kind of the mechanics of those, and then kind of give you a foundation and a base for us to then continue this conversation over this coming year. So as I mentioned, the memo here today is focusing, just kind of giving you an overview and a history of our smart meters, the rates and the rate changes that occurred in conjunction with the install of the smart meters, and then the establishment of those parking meter reserves that exist today. So back in 2014, Council approved the purchase and installation of smart meters in the downtown core. There was about 1,200 meters that went in during March and April of 2014. When the smart meter purchase and install was approved by council, there was also a recommendation at the time by several council members to report back to the council on a couple of items that went along with those smart meters. One was the request to have an evaluation of a policy to potentially establish community parking districts. And then for staff to explore alternatives to raising the rates to cover operating costs of those meters. In response to that council request from several council members, the city manager released their budget addendum. All of these documents we have them in history if anybody wants to look at those specific items, by the way, if anybody's curious. That the budget addendum addressed the requests from the council members and included a couple of recommendations. Those recommendations evaluated the parking district request. It adopted a resolution that moved the meter rates from $1 per hour to $2 per hour in areas with smart meters. And then it established two parking meter districts. So this is the original establishment of the some meter reserves. One meter reserve was specifically established for the Dearborn area parking and multimodal improvement. And then the second reserve was a downtown parking investment reserve. At the time, they were given $350,000 in seed money during that first year. The MBA did an analysis and provided information on the community parking districts. And at that time, the community parking districts were deemed not feasible because they were prohibited due to the bond requirement on the 4th and San Fernando garage. So we could not legally establish a community parking districts at that time. So the mayor's budget message was adopted, and it specifically gave a nod to what the parking fund monies were to be used for at that time. And this is interesting because it kind of dovetails into Charlie's concerns about maintaining our facilities. And it specifically noted that the city's parking fund exists to fund the operations and maintenance of the city's parking system, including the payment of debt service on the 4th San Fernando garage and bonds, and capital development of the parking system. Revenues from the parking garages, lots, and meters are the sole funding source to develop, repair, operate, maintain, and service debt obligations for the parking system. So it really kind of solidified and what the parking fund is intended to do and support. So the meter revenues from the $2 increase that was approved by council created these two reserves, and the reserves were intended to provide the city with some flexibility to set aside funds for various projects while maintaining the compliance with the bond requirements to the fund to the parking fund on the 4th and San Fernando garage. I'm not sure that anybody was on that sits on the board now was on the board back in 2014, but the DPB did submit a memo in support of the increased meter rates and the smart meters at that time. So fast forward to 2017 and 18, building on the success of the smart meters in the downtown core, we came to the parking board and proposed that the smart meters be expanded to all areas of the city. So the exterior areas outside of the downtown core, we proposed to upgrade those meters as well. In February of 2018, there was a formal recommendation from approved by the DPB, and that was outlined that we would install the smart meters in the exterior and increase rates from $1 to $2. And we would also contemplate the establishment of a reserve to fund approved transportation parking related projects impacting the metered areas outside of the downtown core. That recommendation was brought to council, and in June of 2018, council passed resolutions related to increasing the meter rate to $2. We established the parking meter district area reserve, and we modified the membership requirements for the DPB. You may recall at that time, we did not previously have a business association representative, and this action put that person on that slot on the board. The funds from this new meter district reserve, it would combine an existing reserve with this new reserve. So it put together the new parking district reserve with a prior downtown parking investment reserve. So we took an old reserve and created a new combined reserve. And it was noted at the time that funds from the combined reserve could be used for a variety of parking, transportation, and multimodal investments in the greater downtown, Japan, town SOFA, and other meter district areas. The allocation of funds for the various projects in these reserves and the investments would generally occur during the city's annual budget process and be reviewed with DPB. So this new consolidated reserve was expected to receive new net revenues associated with the rate increase from the $1 to $2 when we upgraded the smart meters in the exterior. After cost recovery of the installation costs and the ongoing operating and maintenance costs. So it's really important to note that the anticipated cost recovery of the initial capital investment of the smart meter expansion was based on revenues, capital expenditures, and ongoing operating costs of all the metered areas associated with the expansion. So basically, we'd indicated that the entire system and the upgrade had to be paid back and operating in the black before any money would go into this new reserve. So you may recall at the same time we wrapped up the installation of the smart meters, we started reporting out on an annual basis. I believe the DPB had made a request that we report out on an annual basis how each individual area was contributing and what their kind of status was on the payback schedule for the capital project outlay costs. And you can see that we presented that for the first time at the September 2019 meeting. And then we followed up with our second report a year later at the November 4th, 2020 meeting. And your third annual report out will be at the next meeting. So the November 3rd meeting, we'll have another annual report to kind of give you an idea of where we are with COVID impacts on the meter revenues specific to each area. Interesting that at the time we had drafted these memos, we noted that barring any major changes in revenue streams, which actually unfortunately has come to fruition. I wish I knew I had a crystal ball when we put that in there, and I would have bought lottery tickets and we would have been all in a much better place. But barring any major changes in the revenue streams, the full cost recovery of the project was expected to occur in 1920. We know that that's not what happened, unfortunately, and there are still some lagging costs that need to be covered. We all know that in March 2020, we were deemed non-essential, and we shut down parking services, and in return, free parking was across the city, provided across the city, and it still remains in the exterior free at this time. So there's been some revenue hits, to say the least, there, and hopefully we will definitely have more information on the specific revenue related to each individual area at the next meeting. So we wanted to give you kind of just this background and layout where we were, so we can have a constructive conversation moving forward. So does anybody have any questions? Oh, sorry, I didn't go over next steps here. So we kind of put together a couple of bullets to give you an idea of where we'd like, or where we kind of plan the conversation to go. Clearly open to feedback, and if you want to see some specific things during meetings, please make sure you let us know. Happy to kind of amend this if we need to, but our plan moving forward is our next meeting, November 3rd. In addition to bringing you the annual revenues for meters, we will also kind of talk at that meeting about conceptual options and discuss the direction on potential changes or modifications to the reserve structure. And then hopefully the March 2nd meeting will bring you a staff report to kind of outline potential reserve options and viability. Of course, there's always, a legal aspect to everything. So we'll have to do that research on the options that you'd like to see. And then hopefully in June, bring a full recommendation to DPB for their consideration. And then following that potential recommendation being approved at the DPB, moving it to City Council for consideration after that.
I have a question. You're saying, the proposal is to increase the hourly rate from $1 to $2, right?
There's no proposal. This was a history of what happened when we installed the smart meters. This has already taken place. All
so
the meters.
The current rate is already $2.
Yes.
Okay.
All smart meters, all regular smart meters in the city are $2 an hour. No other questions? David, did you look like you were coming off mute?
I just, conceptual options. How much is in the reserve now?
None.
So the idea is we want to build a reserve, and how are we going to do that?
So reserves exist on the books, as I kind of described them. They're two different reserves. There's no money coming in, so they're not being funded. And to kind of assist with the deficit in the parking fund, those were kind of liquidated, whatever was remaining in them, to cover operating costs. So we're kind of, yes, we're starting almost from scratch in the dollar figure in those reserves. But there are two reserves on the books structured right now. But the discussion would be do you want to keep them as we've kind of described them? Do you think that there's benefit to changing them? What do you see the mechanisms and the changes to be, and how would they function and work? And then, of course, how would those be funded?
So what are we going to do with the reserves? And one reserve is called the Parking Meter District Area Reserve. What's the other one called?
The other one is let me get the exact name of it. Diridon area parking and multimodal improvement reserve.
So one's like downtown, one's like Diraton, basically.
Basically,
And so we're waiting to hear from you in November as to how we should approach this, and then we'll have a conversation.
so the conversation I expect to kind of come from DPB. We can have some kind of ideas, but really we'd like to have you kind of provide the direction on where you might want this to go.
So if there was $500,000 in this fund, then we would be able to use it for certain things.
Right, and you need to kind of, right now, that is noted as being, parking related transportation and multimodal projects.
Which is
Is-
a pretty darn big bucket.
Intentionally so.
It kind of gives us set up to kind of give us some flexibility, but still give us kind of some direction. Is that the definition that you would like to stay? Or
That's
do
part of the
you,
conversation. I got
that's
it.
part of the
Okay.
conversation, yeah.
I'm done. I understand.
Okay. Thank you
Well,
for,
within Japantown, we'd like to see some of the revenues return back to infrastructure improvements in our district. We would love to see an arrangement somewhat similar to the downtown associations as far as supporting our marketing efforts. We are currently making a lot of infrastructure improvements to the zone 1 of our business improvement district out of our own funds. And our business improvement district only brings in $30,000 in revenue annually. So we're operating on an entirely volunteer basis. Currently, right outside my window, we are installing pavers around our tree wells to improve pedestrian safety. Out of our budget, we prune our trees regularly. They're things that we are they're capital improvements that we're having to save a lot to accommodate, and that comes at the expense of merchandising and marketing efforts. So our district, since we are so far removed from downtown as far as not necessarily receiving the benefits of the parking programs in downtown, we would like to see the revenues return back in the form of a couple different ways, whether they be one-off capital improvements and an existing agreement to provide marketing services to our area. I would really love to see new sidewalks here. I mean, that's honestly my wish. If I could die and have new sidewalks in Japantown, I'd be happy. And it's because we have 100-year-old sidewalks that our landlords, I mean, they're all of the internment generation. They're in their 80s and 90s. They do not have the funds to redo sidewalks. They gave exceptionally large subsidies to all the tenants during COVID to allow our small business retail to survive. So, I mean, just for example, one of our curbs is crumbling on the corner of 5th and Jackson. It's a curb that I was told years ago was poorly engineered. So cars frequently ding the side of it. So it's actually missing. And we have some safety patrollers that have been working here to prevent any Asian hate crimes. And they reported it to San Jose 311. So we had some city folks come out, mark up the whole corner, including the adjacent property, to the tune of $12,000. And the landlord adjacent to this curb is not quite happy about the surprise $12,000 bill that they need to pay out by October. So there are many examples of a very aging infrastructure. We have a senior population that's very high. That's why we decided to opt out of the Kiwi Bot program, and we're trying to mitigate some of these issues very closely as far as just keeping people safe, increasing the safety. We changed our trees because the trees were a hazard as far as they were dropping sap, the hackberry trees from years ago that caused seniors to fall. I mean, we're really watching these pedestrian issues very carefully. And I think being able to have some funding from our own meters to replace our sidewalks would be just phenomenal.
So So John, is this something that one of your other areas that are under your watch can look into? Because it's really, Japantown is carrying its weight and then some when it comes to parking revenues coming in. But the issues that Tamika is bringing up are not parking issues, right? They're repair and maintenance of sidewalks has nothing to do necessarily with parking, but I'm not discounting what she's saying at all. Those things all need to get resolved, but I'm not sure that's where, I don't know if the money, there's a direct line to those repairs. I think there's some validity of, if during this time of COVID where, and we'll see the numbers next in a couple months, if the Japantown numbers have held steady through this and everybody else has come down, and I think that's what I'm anticipating seeing, let me put it that way, or that the Japantown numbers have fallen less than the other areas, and it might be another way of saying it. There should be some potentially disproportionate share of that revenue that goes back, but we always have things that we need to do. And so we just have to make sure Japantown's needs are clearly on our list. And so that maybe they don't get this year, but they know that they're going to be getting attention because they
Charlie, don't forget that the Japantown meters are not currently on and charging. So,
Charlie, to answer your question again, John Risto, Director of Transportation, yes, the sidewalk issues that Tamiko's bringing up, we're aware of, and that curb area as well. What she's referring to is we actually go out and inspect those, and then we actually notice the adjacent property owners are actually responsible for fixing curb and gutter and sidewalks. That's the way we have the Muni code. Kind of a surprise to a lot of people, but that's the way it works.
Yeah, that's shocking to me. Is it that way in the downtown core?
Well, yeah, it's everywhere in the city. Now it's taken care of. It's actually addressed various different ways by different property owners, and sometimes we end up doing it from a different method. So what I think Tamiko is asking for is, and we don't really care how it gets fixed. We would love to participate and just get those fixed. And she's absolutely right about investment. So part of what we're doing today is actually introducing this potential idea that, and that's where the board needs to give us some direction, is, are these the kinds of things that you would want to be made eligible in a future reserve that could be capital program related? So that's definitely, so Tamiko's put it out there. I think that's the kind of thing we will take back. We'll potentially develop some ideas of how, if that's the way the parking board, and if it is eligible legally, then we would develop that sort of thing for the consideration of the board and the council to actually adopt those kind of criteria for that. So that's a little bit longer. And I also want to just reiterate what Marion said, is currently we don't have any reserve or any money coming in because the meters aren't being, they're not turned on yet. So so today, that's what we wanted to introduce, is the direction we got was to start to think about how this could work in a capital program, or perhaps the other thing that Tamiko was talking about is service agreements that would probably be done on a separate basis. So the answer to your question, Charlie, yep, we're aware of it. It is responsibility of the DOT working with property owners to get those things fixed. It's a top priority because we don't want people tripping, falling, anything like that, because it's important that those sidewalks, especially in a commercial district like that, are top notch. So, and I think it goes back a little bit, relates to your previous item about our budget. And it to me is really, we have a revenue problem from pre-COVID. We had plenty of money before COVID, and now we only have less than half that. So the sooner we get back to normal collecting meter revenue and parking garage revenue, the better we're all going to be. But anyway, so I hope that answers your question. And yes, we have some more work to do on all of this. But today was just trying to crack that open and start to have that discussion.
Thanks, John.
Councilmember
Morales.
Morales, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so I just chiming in from my experience and my personal use of parking money, parking revenue money in the downtown core. Why would this not be a legal use? I mean, we've used parking fund revenues for all sorts of things in the downtown core. So I guess I'm just confused in that regard. I felt like, you know, these are things that would be completely within the legal use of that fund, whether it was revenue from the downtown core
Yeah,
or obviously any of the greater downtown areas.
Yeah, council member, it may very well be. I was just trying to make sure that it was.
John, maybe I
qualified.
can answer that. They absolutely would be eligible, Councilman Morales. The items that Tomiko mentioned are definitely improvements to the multimodal pedestrian experience. And so they would be eligible for projects if there were funds in the combined meter reserve. There currently aren't funds. And so what staff will be bringing back at the next meeting are options such as, do we keep that one combined reserve for potential allocation to all of the meter districts? Or do we, one option could be looking at having individual reserves for each meter district. And what does that look like?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so that clears up that confusion, at least on the use of the funds. And I, I think I would be in favor of something that did look at separating or segregating the revenues of each meter district, but yet didn't necessarily still prohibit the potential use of funds cross district, right? If it looked like there's a district that is not generating much revenue at all, but has some much needed improvements, and the parking board has that discussion as well and says, yeah, we think that we could allocate funds to that district from the downtown core or another area, but at least it would be able to really be clear what each parking district is generating, and then be able to it'd be easier to be able to draw a line between that and saying, hey, we've got X number of whatever needs in this district, and here's the resources coming from this district, and maybe make it easier to advocate for those. So I know that was our interest a couple years ago, back in 2018, as Arian was describing the history, was to go that route more specific. We ultimately went the route of this, the two different funds in the greater downtown. We sort of combined the other districts. And I know that the Japantown Business Association, Tomiko, and others would be interested in that as well, as there are a lot of needs. Granted, the biggest issue we have in front of us right now is there's no revenue, right? And so, there's not the resource that we thought there would be, considering the pandemic. But I do think it will bounce back, and we will see that. We saw that at least the rate of revenue coming into Japantown outdid our estimates. And so I think we will see that once it does come back. And so I do think in short time, there will be revenues to be able to utilize. Thanks.
And I'd like to make note that we have been paying into the fund for 30 years. Our contributions have exceeded expectations. I mean, even the first initial estimates for the $2 rate were under what we actually brought in. So historically, our district has more than done its share in, contributing to the rest of the city's funds.
All right, thank you. I know we have quite a few. We have 3 more presentation items, so I want to try to jump on these and keep the conversation tight and focused as we try to push these last couple items together. We are on item 7A. I will share my screen for this. Can you see this presentation? Yeah. Okay. The city routinely gets requests for long-term parking agreements outside of just month-to-month parking, and we address those, generally speaking, on a individual basis. We don't have, we have a couple of generic programs on the books currently. Most of the time those don't fit the needs. So what I'm presenting today is trying to develop a framework and criterion to evaluate requests as they come in and not over commit the parking system with long-term agreements and or undervalue it, while also being cognizant of kind of the overall city direction on, you know, mode shift, climate smart initiatives, paring down vehicle trips, and so forth. So a quick background, the city and the redevelopment agency has historically used parking agreements in 3 different ways. Pre-development was a big one. Hotels like the Hilton Marriott, De Anza, the Almaden Hotel, which just recently in the last couple of years signed a long-term parking agreement to facilitate those hotels coming online. The Superior Court came to the city before they built their new courthouse, needed long-term parking before they committed to that development. They got that long-term parking agreement, and so they're here. And the redevelopment agency signed a long-term agreement with 50 West San Fernando, often kind of referred to as the Knight River Building, or what I used to refer to it as. They're at the corner of, well, San Fernando and First. The outside of pre-development, kind of post-development, after the fact, we have tenants or property owners downtown that have come to the city, Harvest Properties with the towers at 2nd, J. Paul with a property at 1 West Santa Clara, Divco with a property at 2 West Santa Clara. All of those have 5+ year parking agreements or have had them in the past to facilitate leasing their properties. And then the city has used parking agreements as an attraction or retention tool, basically marketing downtown to prospective tenants. Mercury News wanted to move downtown, but needed a lock on parking. WeWork, another one, Ernst & Young, Apogee. These are companies that have in some cases come and gone, but that tool was used to bring them downtown or retain them downtown. We now know there's a lot of development on the horizon downtown. Some of the buildings are coming out of the ground as we speak. And we're starting to get more and more requests, or at least inquiries about, hey, what does parking look like? Can we lock up parking? Can we, what types of deals are there out there? I took a snapshot of commercial. I focused on commercial properties, so not residential. Some of these, I guess, could be considered mixed use in a way if they had ground level retail, but these are primarily office buildings, commercial office. We have 4 properties that have existing agreements on the books. We have 2 developments, one coming out of the ground at 200 Park with J. Paul, with a request already into the city for 900 additional parking permits above and beyond their 1,800. 150 East Santa Clara, that's at the corner of Santa Clara and 4th Street, Bayview's project, small one, but nonetheless, they want to build no parking, but seek parking agreement with the city for a long-term agreement. Then you've got existing developments that I called out that were large users of the city's parking supply in the past. And then there's these blue shaded ones that I called out as commercial office buildings that are pending developments, kind of proposed. Millions and millions of square feet, most of the time, at least in their proposed state, proposing parking. But we know that, like this project here, Park Habitat, at less than 1 per 1,000 square feet of parking, historically, these types of properties come to the city and say, our tenant wants additional parking. Can we get parking? So it's kind of looking to the future to understand what that's like and wanting to have some tools in our tool belt to address those needs. So a conceptual policy that our team has put together, and we want to get your feedback on. Targeted specifically at commercial office development, and then creating a set of priority. An existing property to us would be at the forefront. It needs parking today. Why not entertain making that building successful? Under construction, something that's coming out of the ground, let's talk to them next. Something that's been approved and getting ready to start, and then those that are just kind of starting their proposal process. A parking ratio. So this is one that we kind of had to mull over quite a bit internally to come up with something that we think could help these projects, but not overcommit the supply and go against our city goals. So a parking ratio of 1.5 permits per 1,000 square feet. The way we've laid it out is that if your project has no parking, you could get up to the 1.5 per 1,000. If your project is proposing some parking, we could effectively get you up to 1.5. So let's say a building is being proposed with 1 per 1,000 parking, then we could potentially look at 0.5 per 1,000 to get them up to 1.5. What we don't want to see is a project that's coming in at 1 and then coming to us and said, our tenants want 3 per 1,000, we want 2 per 1,000 from the city. And that's the only way this project's going to be successful. To us, that doesn't necessarily make sense. Anything that's parked over 1.5 would not be eligible for the program. Term length, this would be what I call the active use. This would be the period of time they actually are parking, because some of these agreements would be signed in advance of the building being completed. So an existing property would get 5 years, and a proposed project could get 10 years of active use. Now that agreement might be a 7-year agreement, let's say, for an existing property, because they're fielding tenants. Once those permits are active, they would have a 5-year life. On a proposed development, maybe it's a 15-year agreement. They need 5 years to get the building out of the ground and get a tenant. Once they're active, they would have 10 years. The proposed development, the reason why it's being proposed to be longer term is that we often hear from the developers that they need these for financing. They need them for long-term leases. As the building is initially being leased, they need a longer runway. So it's acknowledging that aspect. From a rate perspective, no more of the historic, what we have on the books currently are things like $25 to hold parking for years and years, and then market rate. What we're saying is that if you want to hold parking, fine, but we're going to cap it at 2 years, and you're going to pay $100 per month per permit for those. And then once they're activated as parking, it'll be the higher of the market rate, or $125. And then there will be annual increases. We've already signed several agreements with this makeup. And so there's developers willing to take on this expense for the sake of their projects. And then in terms of availability, we're setting aside, or conceptually setting aside 2,000 permits with the goal of, rather than having them be specifically earmarked for a garage, they would be what we're calling global access permits. We would grant parking access in any one of the downtown garages, Market Street, 3rd Street, 4th and San Fernando, and 2nd and San Carlos, and potentially looking at opportunities to use the convention center on non-event days. There are days during the year where the convention center is dark, there's nothing going on in there, and we might be able to take some additional parking supply in that area for permit parkers, with the acknowledgement that when there are events, they would have to find parking in one of the other garages. So today, based on that, we're looking for feedback on kind of the targeted group, commercial versus anything else, residential. Commercial is what makes the engine downtown move. The residential to us is not where the parking supply should necessarily get earmarked in these kind of quantities. We can accept monthly parkers from residential towers on an aside individually, but not as the backstop to make that project work. Comments on the ratio of 1.5 per 1,000. any comments on those term lengths. And I did want to highlight that at the Friday council study session, this topic was touched on very briefly as kind of a parallel topic to all these conversations around downtown and parking. So with that, I can take this off so I can actually see faces and answer any questions.
Just a quick comment, I guess Charlie left and he's put me in charge, which is very dangerous.
I'm
Charlie,
about to leave.
Oh, I didn't see you there.
So, but yes, you're in the hopefully capable hands of David here.
That
And I
probably
apologize
not,
for
but
having to step
moving
aside.
on. So comments from the group.
Thanks.
I have a question.
Sure.
Do you consider the 1.5 spaces max to be a conservative estimate or somewhere in between? How are you gauging that number?
I think from our perspective, it's something that from the parking team, we can accommodate and we can. So we looked at it from a pre-pandemic, we had a robust parking program, garages routinely over 90% occupied. And it was meeting the needs of the buildings downtown, if you will. There were some pockets where we had wait lists, but that was just people's desire and non-interest in walking a couple of blocks from one garage to their office building. So we weren't at a capacity issue in the downtown. So that's where that kind of 2,000 number comes from of available permits, is that at a system-wide level, we think we can accommodate our pre-pandemic load plus these 2,000 permits. But acknowledging that, yeah, there's plenty of tenants and property owners downtown that would love to have the flexibility to offer 3, 4 per 1,000 type of parking. WeWork, yeah, they would have taken 10 per 1,000 to have the flexibility to give anybody that rented a desk a parking permit. Of course, it makes their business model work. So does this meet the developer's wishes and desires? I don't think so, but it at least puts something on the table where we can come to the table and play and help in a way without over committing.
That's good. I appreciate that.
So in my new role, I'd be interested to hear what Sarah had to say about this, since I think she's certainly in a unique position to offer perspective.
Absolutely. Oh, we can't hear you, Sarah. Although it says you're off mute.
We're going to force you to talk today, Sarah. I'm sorry.
The joys of Zoom. This has happened to me, and my only recourse was to actually leave the meeting and come back.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, I have a comment and a question. My first comment or perspective is, yes, Arian, I think that this program is needed downtown. It impacts not only an ability for a landlord or an office building owner to attract tenants, it also impacts their overall valuation and assessment of investment in commercial office buildings in downtown San Jose. And as you point out, there are a number of buildings that do not have adequate parking. So I think we definitely need a program like this downtown because it impacts dollars into an investment into the downtown core. What I would say to Tamiko's question is that the standard for this market for office leases is for a landlord to offer 3 parking spaces per 1,000 feet. So the 1.5 is definitely below where we would consider, or any broker of a commercial office space would consider market. Does that mean that we're inhibiting the ability to bring in tenants? Not necessarily, because as Arian pointed out, like, there, even at its peak, we were still satisfying the needs of the tenants within the different buildings downtown. What I would say to that, or the one caveat to that, is that if you get a large tenant, like Arian pointed out, Mercury News, WeWork, others, if you get a large tenant, they are likely going to try to require or ask for more parking. So that's just normal. And Arian, I think, has done a really good job in the past of managing that demand fluctuation as it's happened. So that's my comment. My question, Arian, is, we're not the only CBD to have shortages of parking within privately owned commercial office spaces. What have other CBDs done? And is there any way that you can learn from similar downtowns?
Who would be our good peers, do you think?
Well, I'd have to look at, other cities that own large amounts of off-street parking. Many cities don't invest in off-street parking like San Jose has. Obviously, San Francisco has off-street garages. They use market pricing. Prices go up, people stop driving. So it's not a good analogy for us per se. Sacramento has some garages. There are other cities, so I'd have to do a little digging. I mean, most cities these days use the market pricing tool to effectively, make it more difficult to drive and move the needle in the mode. I'm sure there's agreements out there. It's just not readily published as a kind of program that I'm aware of, but we can certainly do a little cursory asking of peers.
Okay, here I am again. Any other comments from anybody?
Scott's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Scott, I didn't see it in the window there. Yeah, please.
Yeah, a couple comments and then I'm going to have a question about this program. So we have been doing this for a long time. Obviously, these are some of our biggest members. It's been a revenue generator also for the parking program to kind of pre-sell some of our monthly passes. And I do have several concerns about going up to 2,000, just given that pre-pandemic, I think Arian's accurate talking system-wide, but Market San Pedro, there were certain hours that Market San Pedro was over 95%. And you can look at some of the occupancy records, and we actually had people parked completely across the top deck of the garage at the peak. People aren't in the courts, people aren't, we've already got parking deals that are in place for that garage. And I do agree that it helps the developers, but we have to realize that there are many buildings, B and C buildings, older buildings that have zero parking, and they're parking right now on development sites. So every surface parking lot in the downtown right now is a development site. And the big one is, we think, is going to go away when VTA takes down BART, and you're going to potentially push 330 spaces off directly across the street from Market San Pedro. And then
Let me jump in real quick, Scott, and just to reiterate that, yeah, we acknowledge these B and C buildings as a key target, thus the reason why they were prioritized as number one. An existing building, they would have zero parking, so they would qualify for the maximum amount. And we would take that as kind of start taking and fielding requests if this program comes to fruition. And this would give the places like, I always call them community towers is a good example. Their name isn't that, it's 111 North Market, I think now. The towers at Second Harvest Properties would be another one. They don't technically have their own parking supply, so they're at zero. They have hundreds of thousands of square feet. So we could conceivably entertain them. Bank of Italy, all these types of properties would be at the forefront, and then there would be others to come in.
Right, thank you. And that's really important to acknowledge the preference there. But at the end of the day, we have X number of spaces that are available, and it really becomes a supply and demand issue. To Sarah's question about what are the other CBDs doing, it's not really a question of they're charging market rate. Because, you know, if you're up to $125, and I'm glad to see that you're going to get it for those who want to hold spaces too. We've been pretty generous with that, but that's pretty close to our market right now in the private garages. It really is more of reserved spaces. You've got these developments essentially reserving on a global access, so they might have to move around. Market San Pedro is completely full. They might have to go hunt and peck for one of the other garages, but it really kind of begs the long-term supply. You know, is the program going to create more supply, and is it going to be in a position to do so, whether it was with the Parking Plus or what we were doing with the 88 before. So I would like us, I think the place to start is, what are the commitments that we currently have? How many spaces is that? I was surprised to hear you've got 900 spaces already being requested for City View, and I just don't see how you accommodate those if you're not including the convention center garage. So I do think that we need to. I'd be interested in working to understand the specifics of the program, because that's what's going to make it work.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of reiterate at least the conceptual specifics are these again. So commercial, you have to be a commercial property, and then it's in this order. Then it comes down to how much parking you're requesting based on how much parking you have on site. It would whittle that down. Then it's a, you know, term length conversation. The rates are another one. And then I think, you know, just this number of permits. So to Scott, your point is 2,000 the right number? We're confident we can accommodate them, again, with the assumption that it's a global permit. You might not be able to park in the Market Street garage every day. If you decide you like to come to the office at 10 a.m., probably not going to be great. If you come to the office at 8 a.m. every day, you can probably find that spot. But we would guarantee, is not my favorite word when it comes to parking, but we would have a parking place downtown for you in this global permit.
Yeah, so my question, Arian, would be, if you've already got 2,000, because people are going for 5, 7 years, whatever, you've already got the 2,000, and now one of these existing properties comes into you, are they now on the waiting list?
Yes.
Or
if
they
there's,
could purchase,
Month.
purchase month to month.
correct. We just wouldn't lock up long-term
They
deals
just couldn't be
beyond.
in a long-term agreement.
But we were in a waiting list for month-to-month permits.
At one garage, the 3rd Street garage had a waiting list, and that was the only one pre-pandemic.
And pre-global permit.
Correct. If we had global permits, we would have issued many more and said, yeah, you can come to the 3rd Street garage to the extent there's availability on any given day.
And that list, just to clarify again, wasn't necessarily people weren't getting parking and being turned away from parking. They just wanted a garage closer to where they were because they didn't want to walk 2 blocks. So there's parking available for them if they wanted it. They just wanted it at a specific garage.
So unless there are any other things, I think we're going to be touching on this. I would envision us probably coming back again.
Arian, if I could just make, if you could take that item off, but if I could just make one comment. Is anyone here other than myself, or how does the thought process for the restaurants and the retail and the ground floor businesses that have customers who come to them, how are they impacted by this?
Well, again, we kind of use that 2,000 permit number was based upon pre-pandemic numbers. So everything we were accommodating pre-pandemic still exists. The number of visitors, the number of permit holders, they were still in the evaluation matrix, if you will. So if at a garage we had this much capacity and we were here, then we took that much, added it to the pot. So we would still envision accommodating all of the people that had month-to-month parking every retail office or retail restaurant worker that wanted to buy a permit, anybody that just came down to come to dinner or drinks or an event. We used all of that analysis, all that data in there.
And that's how you arrived at the 2,000 number.
Yeah, it was pre-pandemic activity, visitor and permit holders. There was always a little, capacity left at the top of that bar chart. And how much could we squeeze in if we wanted to allocate all of that to permit holders?
So on a sort of total, I got a couple of questions about this. I'm sorry, but the first question is, right now, if you pay your whatever it is, 100 or 125 or whatever it is for a parking place, you have that in perpetuity as long as you pay the bill, right?
Nope. Nothing is guaranteed if you're monthly. At 30 days.
Oh, it's a 30-day deal, and you can cancel anybody's deal with 30 days.
Correct.
Okay. So
we've never done it. I will say that the city, as far as I'm aware, has never terminated paid parkers.
Fundamentally, that's the deal. And so what these guys want is more time. And what I can't understand is if I was a developer and you gave me 5 years, and then I went to my lender and I said, I got 5 years, but I only got 5 years. I'm not sure how the lender would react to the fact that after 5 years, all of your parking that you've offered to your tenant who has a 10-year term is kaput, or even if it's a 10-year and then it goes away. So I don't quite understand, unless you're giving it to them forever, I don't understand how that works. And then the pricing, I don't understand. To me, I guess, I hate to put it this way, but these folks didn't build enough parking in their buildings if they're building these new buildings, and now they want us to provide their parking in a way so that they can lease their buildings. And maybe they should pay a whole bunch of money to us so that we can build a parking structure for them, because they didn't build one for themselves. I mean, I'm sorry to put it that way, but on the other hand, you've got this notion that you want to attract people to develop in downtown. And so they can't afford to build the parking if they want to build the building because the rents aren't high enough. And then you've got this other factor, which is everybody's supposed to be taking the bus. And so I don't have the answer to any of these questions, but my head's just kind of like spinning around how does this affect all of the restaurants and the other ground floor retail business that thought there would always be parking in these areas when they rented, and then now all of these other factors that are going on. So I guess the one thing I'd like to know is, in that chart that had all the colors, why we need a policy, if there was another column that said how many of these businesses that are here, how many existing spaces are in the pot, and then another column that said how many are they asking for, because I'll switch hats. From 20 years ago when I worked at the redevelopment agency, I remember all these complex deals that we struck with like 50 West San Fernando and what was called the Pavilion at the time, and other things where they have a commitment to put, let's talk about Abby Magenfar, my favorite person on the planet, and all of these deals that were put together. Can you put a couple of columns together with what those numbers were that are existing? I mean, 50 West San Fernando, for instance, has some kind of a commitment.
Yep.
Is that the 560 that you have there? Or
50 West San Fernando? No, that's their existing on-site.
That's their total number of spaces. So how many of those were tied up somewhere in the 17th Amendment to the San Antonio Development Plan?
Yeah, so let me touch on, so there was a lot there.
I know, I'm sorry about that.
I'll try to quickly address. Term length, number one. Is this going to satisfy developers? I don't think so. But it's basically the city putting a foot down to say, here's what we're willing to do. If you don't like it, I guess you better decide you're going to build more parking if you're in the pre-development stage. If you're an existing building, we're going to get you up to 1.5, but that's it. We're not interested in giving buildings 3 per 1,000 every building. So it's us putting it in that. Again, this is staff's first proposal. We can take comments in on, well, it should be 3, it should be 4, don't go to 1.5. That's on the term length piece. 5 years for an existing development seems to jive with a lot of the previous agreements that we've inked over the years. A lot of leases don't extend beyond that. So it satisfies like a run of leasing. For a proposed development, 10 years, is this going to get a financier to build a $100 million building on 10 years of parking? I don't suspect it will. Maybe they build 1 per 1,000 or 2 per 1,000 in the building, and this moves the needle enough. Maybe, I don't know. But again, we had to, at a staff level, just kind of dig our heels in and say, this is all, we're not going to go to the mat and just eat the responsibility. On those others, there are parking commitments, but they're waning at this point. We don't have many. 50 West San Fernando is one that has an agreement in perpetuity. Henry, I see you. I'll be right there. So there's a lot to chew on. I think at this point, we're just seeking the board's consensus that a conceptual program that starts to look like this is needed, and that staff should then start putting this together. Otherwise, what'll end up happening is we just take these on an ad hoc basis. Every request that comes in, first in, gets chewed on, and we accept it. And then nobody else gets a look after that if we're committed.
The bigger picture, I think, is this needs to be tied into the next item on the agenda, the TDM plan.
Yep.
Which conceptually is saying, Mr. Developer, you come back and tell me, you know, what you can do to reduce your parking. So there's a tie-in between these things, and maybe this could be, again, the highest priority, existing commercial buildings. Thanks.
So this is an action item. I don't know if the board's in a position at this point to, you know, make an approval on the framework that we've got here for staff to move forward, but I would love it if we were, because then that would give us just another kind of bullet in the revolver to run further down the road with this. But what's the thought here? We've got 4 board members left, 5 at the table. So if I get a motion to approve the concept of this, and we can return next meeting with anything else, or
Can I ask a question, Arian? What exactly is the parking board's role in this project? Because it sounds like you're already making deals, or have in the past. Were we approving
anything? So right now there's various programs. Yeah, so there's various programs on the books, but they're very specific. You have to fit into this peg to qualify for them. Anything outside of that goes directly to council and is approved as a standalone parking agreement. The Almaden Hotel, for example, was one that went outside of any program that we had. So council approved that one. What this would do is create another bucket for us to, at a department level, without having to go to council after we got it approved, vet these against these criteria and sign agreements at a department level. Without that, we would review them. If they don't fit into an existing bucket, we would review it. If we at a staff level approved it, we would take it to council and do that.
I would make a motion that we resume a discussion of this at our next meeting.
Fair enough. I don't think we, yeah, that's fine. You got a second to that, David? That's fine. I can put that down. All in favor?
Yeah, let's keep talking.
Yeah.
Right. This is a big deal though, right? This is not a little exercise here. Am I right in thinking that, or?
I mean, once we're going forward, we would take it to council to basically amend our rate book, if you will, to put this program on the books. I think it would give us a lot of tools at a staff level and at a city level to say, here's the menu of options. If you think you can fit into one of these, please submit a request. Outside of that, we get all sorts of requests. Give us 4 parking spaces per 1,000. We need them for 50 years, and we have to chew on that. And we have to get buy-in at the entire city level. So I would prefer that we have a program and we just say yay or nay versus chewing on these. Will we get requests that are outside of the menu? Of course, but at least we then say the menu didn't satisfy them. Our recommendation is to reject.
So your objective is to create a more fair process and more orderly, and then have it limited to that certain maximum number.
Yep.
And if that certain developer with that thing called Almaden Hotel, which is next to the De Anza, I guess, decides to work through another channel, then hopefully they would be pushed back through this channel.
Yeah, well, they've already locked their agreement.
I'm talking about the next one of those.
And the next one, yes, exactly. Councilmember Perales, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to echo, I agree with the need of this policy. As Arian and DOT staff know, these one-offs come along way too often. And quite frankly, it's typically relationship-based. There's been some like the Almaden Hotel and with the J. Paul development and others that I have really a lot of concerns about. And we've had to then work through independently on them, on all the challenges. And it really kind of boiled down to just, enough political support could move some of these through, and then we're out of luck. And I had brought to DOT the concerns as well on equity, on, it shouldn't be just the first through the door. And if it's some major developer or partner that ends up not having enough parking on site, and then once again, 300 something units, as Scott was talking about, then all of a sudden, or 300 something spaces, and then they're gone. So I definitely think this policy is needed, and it will greatly help with a more fair distribution of the spaces that we have.
So at this point, we can bring it back. It may look the same or very close to what we're doing here, but maybe the board has had a little more time to chew on it and is in a position to make a formal recommendation, which would then help us take that to council. We are at 12 o'clock, and I want to personally apologize to all the other members. If from a DPB member perspective, from the board members, is there interest and willingness to stay on for a little bit longer to touch on items 8A or 8B? And I'm not sure, Jessica, if your team even has the ability to stay on.
Yeah, I know we have a couple meetings coming up, but this takes precedent. So I think what I would offer about both of these items as background as the board thinks about whether they want to hear these is these two items, the downtown transportation plan and the citywide parking and transportation demand management ordinance. These are two efforts that don't directly fall into the purview of the parking board, but they're certainly relevant to these conversations. So we wanted to make sure that we brought you timely information about them to keep you in the loop and make sure we got your feedback. What I'm going to do right now regarding I muted myself, sorry. The parking and transportation management item is send a link to the study session that we had with the city council last Friday. What we were going to give you today was a synopsis of that study session with the version of the staff presentation. We're happy to kind of be bumped to a future meeting, but I'm just also cognizant that it's perhaps not as timely for that item in particular. And so we can also go through some of the slides. On the downtown transportation plan, our leads for that project, Wilson Tam and Eric Eidlin, are here and I think can stay a little bit longer. But one of the things that we wanted to do was really to invite your participation and the participation of other people within your networks into the community meetings that we'll be having this fall for the downtown transportation plan. So they have a summary prepared that's in the agenda for today. We can walk through that if that's your preference. But we can also follow up with meetings about the upcoming online open houses. So that's my preamble, and I'll let the board discuss now what you'd like to do.
Is this my job? Anybody have any comments?
So I can stay on for another 25, 30 minutes because I have a hard stop at 12:30.
Same.
Well, the question is, does anyone need to leave or should we try to get through this? Henry's leaving. So that means we'd still have 1, 2, 3.
Or
Sarah
if-
has 10 minutes.
Sarah's got 10 minutes. So my recommendation, given that, you know, in the next 8 minutes, we're probably not going to get much underway. And again, sorry for monopolizing 2 hours of everybody's time that didn't get a chance to present. Jessica, like, I think we can put this on the agenda for next meeting and put it up front so that it's the first, to the extent that makes sense. The next meeting's in November. And, you know,
Yeah, the
has the ship sailed at that point, or?
so ships never sail. They're still, you know, well, I shouldn't say they never sail, but the ships won't have sailed. But to be honest, especially with the parking and transportation demand management ordinance, our expectation is to be bringing a recommendation to Planning Commission by this December and to City Council in January. So a significant amount of that kind of work and feedback gathering, you know, may be more difficult at your November meeting. The downtown transportation plan similarly is in a feedback gathering mode this fall. So that's probably a little bit more timely, but what I'd recommend we do is make sure that the downtown parking board members get the link for the online open house that will be coming up in October sent to them so that you can spread it to your networks, you can participate in that more fully at that time. And of course, in the meantime, you have the slides we were going to present today. If you have any questions or thoughts or groups that you'd like us to reach out to, please just let us know.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that not to commit anybody's calendar beyond what board members are accustomed to, but if this were important enough to the board members, you could always agendize a new ad hoc meeting where these 2 items are the only agenda items. We would just need to follow the posting requirements and, you know, acknowledge it in today's meeting minutes and then put something on the book for October for an hour and just have these 2 items be the only things. I mean, that's an idea if it meets timeline and everything else and the board were interested enough to.
Well, I have a comment here. So I would appreciate, you know, a special session for that, because I think even when you talk about a plan like this in one of the regular meetings might be too time consuming. So I'm pretty open to having a separate session. And Arian, like you said, maybe sometime in October.
Agreed.
Great.
Works for me. 4-0.
Since we're all here and rather than shooting off 40 emails to try and tie down a date, is there some availability for October 6th? It'd be the first Wednesday in October. I got a thumbs up for.
I will throw out there that some of us with elementary age school kids, that is our fall break, which is pretty awkward. So I cannot commit myself that week.
Oh yeah, mine's the week before, so sorry. October 13th. I guess it could,
that doesn't work for me.
the 12th, the 14th.
This is why we're doing this.
Well, the 12th would work, only that the entire week of the 13th work except Wednesday and Thursday.
Okay, how about the 12th? How about, anybody have an issue with that? We could do 10 a.m. if that works. We could do 9 a.m.
10 would be preferred from my side, but 9 works too.
Okay, the 12th at 10 a.m. it is. And if you're not here, you didn't get a vote.
All right. right.
Let's
Well,
go.
thanks very much,
10
everybody,
a.m.
for being willing to set aside additional time.
And the
to
agenda
discuss.
will be just those two items which are on the agenda under 8A and 8B.
Yep, so I will note those in the minutes for this, that they're deferred to a special meeting on October 12th at 10 a.m. I'll create the agenda. I'll use the same links, same presentations, and send that out with the Zoom link to everybody this week, we'll say, maybe next week at the latest.
Okay.
Sooner than better for those who are not here anyway. Just an email, let them know about the date. Huh? Okay, I think, Arian, do we have anything else? Are we good? Tamiko?
Nope, I will
I
take
have-
an adjournment of the meeting at.
Tamiko has one item.
Sorry.
One question. Sorry. I was thinking about 7A because I do like the idea of a program for the parking, just to limit things for developers. I've been following this thing, but I was trying to consider what David had to say, David and Scott, with regards to the retail and everything else. Is there a way to add something into that, maybe your proposal that locks down a certain number for retail or small businesses where there's a certain pot that's completely untouched, even if a developer meets these requirements? Is that at all possible?
I wouldn't say it's impossible. It's just taking slices of the pie away. If we apply them in square footage relationships, it's almost nothing for, one of these small kind of frontage retail spaces. Now, where the script gets a little flipped is that, to the extent almost every building downtown that has ground floor retail has, commercial above it, that's in the square footage calculation. So they could allocate those permits to their ground floor retail. I look at Harvest as an example. I don't know that they gave Ike's Sandwiches any parking privileges. I think they gave them all to the tenants in the upper floors of the buildings. And I suspect that's what would happen everywhere else.
So do you think it's more about educating the small businesses on what their options are so that they don't get lost in the whole, process of this?
Yeah, I would think we would continue to market the availability of month-to-month parking, and our goal being, once you're in and paying for parking, you're effectively in, and we manage that supply. I'm not aware of any standalone retail coming online, and those businesses that are there today, to the extent they're buying monthly parking, I would envision we would continue to accommodate them. And they were in our pre-pandemic calculations anyway. So as long as they come back, we should have a spot for them.
But we also should not forget that the residents may need parking too. It's not just the small businesses. And when you live in downtown, especially with all the high rises going up, and it's getting less and less parking. And when you look at the public comment for 8B, is also talking about, resident parking. So I think it's really a bigger issue than just, this parking agreement conceptual basis what you have
just
right now.
On that, I would say we've got thousands of parking spaces on evenings and weekends available for residents to park. The challenge becomes residents don't just park on evenings and weekends. And we acknowledge that. And we're unfortunately not necessarily best equipped to accommodate large sums of residents 24/7, 365, and all of the businesses.
No, I understand that. All I want to bring up, we talk about, one group, and then what about small businesses? And then we need to talk about residents. So this is why I'm kind of not comfortable right now to make a decision about 7A. But I agree there should be a framework for, this whole thing.
Yep. Good.
I think we're still talking about 7A. I would recommend, Arian, that you allocate some time to discussion of that at the next meeting in November.
Oh, in November it will be.
November.
Yes.
In
Not in
November,
October.
because I think you're going to have to give us some time to chew on this thing. And if you could put those two columns in there, what's already in these various buckets, and then what these people are asking in that chart you had with the colors, that would be helpful for me anyway.
Yeah.
Are we concluding, please?
Yes.
Everybody's got to
11
go.
p.m.
And thank you all. And I hope I did a half decent job of Charlie springing this on me. So thank you very much.
Thanks,
And the
everyone.
time is 12:11.
Duly noted.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Good night. Goodbye.